All right, good morning, everybody. It's Tuesday morning, and we are working our way through Ephesians during Holy Week as we are remembering the greatest story ever told, the one that's the most important to us as followers of Jesus, and indeed, the one that's the most important to the world, the thing that happened that changed all of history. Nothing is more important than this story. And as we work through Ephesians, we are moving from identity, understanding who we are as followers of Jesus, who we are in God's eyes, and learning to embrace that identity, understanding its purpose. And as we move through the week, what does it look like to actually practice? What do we look like as followers of Jesus in the ways that we act? So today we're in chapter 2, and in chapter 2, we're going to jump right to the end and work our way back. So at the very end of chapter 2, it says this, starting in verse 19, "Consequently, you are no longer foreigners and strangers, but fellow citizens with God's people and members of God's household." Wow. We are now, just as we talked about yesterday, adopted into God's family. We are full members of God's family. Another image is given us of being citizens with God's people and members of God's household. Again, this idea that we belong to something new. And as citizens of a new country, if you've ever thought about becoming a citizen of another country or know someone who has, a number of things have to happen when you become a citizen of a new country. And among those things, if we want to think about it in broad terms, you have to embrace new history, new traditions, new language, new customs, new priorities. When you move from being a citizen of one place to a citizen of another, you take on a new identity. You clothe yourself with what it means to be a citizen of that country. And that's what we are called to. That's what we are given. And so we ask ourselves, how does that happen? And that takes us back to the beginning of Ephesians chapter 2. And so let me read the first couple verses, because this is going to give us some information that will help us look at our own lives in a way that can help us fully embrace our adoption, fully embrace our citizenship, our identity as children of God, as members and citizens of God's kingdom. So Paul starts like this in chapter 2. "As for you, you were dead in your transgressions and sins in which you used to live when you followed the ways of this world and the ruler of the kingdom of the air, the spirit who is now at work in those who are disobedient. All of us also lived among them at one time, gratifying the cravings of our flesh and following its desires and thoughts." Wow, this is some harsh stuff, and it's really one of the things that's the most valuable for us to look at, maybe in this whole book, in terms of understanding our identity. Because what Paul's saying to us is that before we were in Christ, we were dead. And here's the problem. In our death, we were doing something that Paul refers to, and all of us were doing this, including Paul. Paul's saying this, me too. So he's not saying there's something wrong with you. He's saying that we as human beings, all of us also did this. And while we were doing it, we were gratifying the desires of our flesh, the cravings. We were gratifying what we desired. We were following the desires and thoughts of our flesh. And our flesh in this case is our natural birth. It's the thing that we lived before we were in Christ. And here's the problem. We were dead, but when we gratify things, it makes us feel that we're alive. So even as we were in death, doing things that satisfied us and made us feel good, we were actually dead. We felt alive, but we were dead. And one of the traps, my friends, and you know this, and I know this, is that when we're not comfortable in our new place as a follower of Jesus, we look back to when we felt like we were alive, and we will retreat back to things that make us feel alive, but are actually a kind of death. And in doing that, we are actually following the ruler of the kingdom of the air. Now, that's the first reference here that we find to these spiritual forces and spiritual powers that we'll talk about when we get to the end of this study in Ephesians chapter 6. But you are either following the king of the kingdom of heaven, who is Jesus, or you are following the king of the ruler of the air, the earthly thing that says, gratify yourself, make yourself feel good. Now here comes the promise. Because of his great love for us, in verse 4, God, who is rich in mercy, made us alive even when we were dead. And this is the cool thing. We talked yesterday a little bit about predestination. Now, again, this is a very complicated concept that a lot of people spend their whole life studying and talking about. But for us, we define predestination as it has always been God's plan for you that you would be alive. In fact, even when you were dead, God made you alive? Yep. But 2,000 years ago, the death of Jesus on the cross that we celebrate this week made you alive in Christ, even 2,000 years before you were born. You had done nothing when Jesus made you alive. And it's always been his plan for you that you would be made alive. It says it made us alive with Christ, and it is by grace you have been saved. God raised us up with Christ and seated us with him in the heavenly realms. Now, this is a weird thing, but that's past tense. When we were made alive in Jesus, it's done. Sometimes we think following Jesus is all about, okay, my sins are forgiven and now I'll die and go to heaven. No, when you accept Christ, when you are in Christ, you're actually now seated in the kingdom of heaven as an heir with Christ. You actually now are bringing heaven to earth, not waiting to go to heaven when you die, just toughing it out. You are now a part of bringing the kingdom of heaven to earth. What a promise. And then comes some verses that are so famous. For it is by grace you have been saved through faith, and this not from yourselves. It's the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast. That's amazing. You didn't do anything to get God to say, I guess maybe he's good enough. I guess maybe he's done enough. No, before you were even born, or as it says here, when you were still dead, running around trying to make yourself feel alive, gratifying the desires of your sinful nature, when you were still dead, God made you alive through his grace. There's nothing you can do to earn God's grace. There's nothing you can do where God will say, that's too much. You are alive in Christ because of his grace. You've been saved through grace by your faith in Jesus. And then what happens? For we are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do. When you become a citizen of heaven, there's work for you to do. This isn't just about, I'll die and go to heaven. No, there's things for you to do. And this is a promise I want to make for you. You will never feel more alive than when you are fulfilling the purpose for which you were created as a full citizen of heaven, as a full son of God through adoption. You'll never feel more alive. But there are times when maybe we get bored, or maybe we doubt, or maybe we're afraid. And we can quickly run back to the time that we felt like we were alive. We have a hard time letting go of the death of our past that made us feel like we are alive. Some of you need to really look at old habits and old thought patterns. There are relationships that need to be left dead even though they made you feel alive. There are behaviors, there are language, there are values, there are substances for some of you that actually are death, but they make you feel alive. My promise to you is you will never feel more alive than when you are fulfilling the good works which God has prepared in advance for you to do according to the purpose for which you are created. You are a son of God. You are alive in Christ. As we go through Holy Week and Jesus takes death for us, let's really be honest with ourselves about how we run back to death to make ourselves feel alive. Let's be willing to give up the old because the old is gone, the new is come. and let's be citizens of this new kingdom. We are fully citizens. As you get to the end of the chapter, he finishes us with this, that we are being built together to become a dwelling in which God lives by his Spirit. And this is for you individually. The very Spirit of God comes and lives within you. You are a temple of the living God. And for us as a community, we're building together in the various places where we work with other people and live with other people and experience life with other people that are following Jesus. We are building together a community in which God dwells by his Spirit. You will never be more alive than when you are experiencing that community. Let's embrace our identity as citizens in the new kingdom and bring that kingdom, joining Jesus and bringing the kingdom of heaven to earth, not waiting to go there someday, but bringing the kingdom of heaven to earth in the ways we treat ourselves, we treat others, and reach out to those that don't know Jesus. Have a great Tuesday, and we will talk to you again tomorrow morning as we go to chapter 3 in our study on Ephesians, from identity to purpose to practice.